The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. Good morning, Carolyn. What a show we have for you today.
Yeah.
One of the greatest, in my opinion, greatest politicians I've ever had the privilege of knowing. He is Congressman Thomas Massie. He's the House representative from Kentucky's 4th District. That's over in the East, not that far from some great other Eastern Appalachia politicians we know. He won his first election in 2012, and his latest one in 2024. I just looked it up, Carolyn. He won by 99. He got 99% of the vote. It's extraordinary. His opposition dropped out. He was a successful entrepreneur. After graduating from MIT as an engineer and successful entrepreneur, started up a company, sold it, and then moved back with his wife to the place in Kentucky where he grew up, and he then became the judge executive of Lewis County from 2011 to 2012 before running to Congress. Since he's been in Congress, he's known for his support of constitutional principles of food and health and financial freedom, and I think most of all known for his great good humor and common sense. So. And I should mention he was Hero of the Year on the Solari Report last year. So with no further ado, Congressman Massie, thank you so much for joining us on Financial Rebellion. What a pleasure it is to have you here. I can see your beautiful Kentucky in the background.
Yeah, those are the hills on my farm. We don't have a lot of flat ground here, but what flat ground we do have, we use judiciously. Great to be with you, Catherine and Carolyn, today. I don't usually get a full hour to talk about things, so this is exciting.
Well, there's so many issues that you've been in. I follow your Twitter very carefully, your Twitter feed, and I guess your X feed now is what we call it. And if you look at how many issues you're leading on, it's incredible. And we're going to talk about several of them today. And if we have more time, there's plenty more. But we want to start off with both what's been happening with what's called the Big Beautiful Bill and the debt bubble, the debt bomb. You have a debt clock you're going to tell us about, and we're going to go into Epstein, which I think is one of the most important issues. And you've been a real leader on Epstein, and it's quite interesting what's happening. But let's start with the big, not so beautiful bill. Tell us what happened, what you did, and what this means.
Well, it's like the Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There's the good and the bad. There's good and bad in this bill, but let me tell you the ugly part about it. The ugliest thing about the big bill, I can't call it beautiful because it's not, the big ugly bill, is that it operates over a 10-year window. And in the first 3 years, you get all the goodies. You get more spending for Republican priorities, and you get these wonderful tax cuts. I love tax cuts. In fact, 2 of the tax cuts are my standalone bills: no tax on tips and no tax on Social Security. They've toned my bill down and introduced it as an amendment in the big, beautiful, ugly bill. But here's what they're not telling you. After 3 years, all the big spending gets cut, and all the tax cuts go away. The 3 new tax cuts that's in this bill go away. And they promise that by the 4th year, this thing will start to get fiscally conservative. And by the 10th year, it will have 0 impact on the deficit. They're not, Republicans used to come out with these budgets that would balance in 10 years. But the big bill doesn't balance in 10 years. They just say at the end of the 10th year, it's no worse than what was already going to happen if we did nothing. And here's the problem with that 10-year window. I've been in Congress over 12 years, so I've seen several of these 10-year plans. All that happens is the first year. Sometimes the second year happens, but by the time they've had 2 elections and you get to the 4th year, they'll call it a fiscal cliff. What'll happen in the fourth year of this big bill is it'll be different senators, different representatives. They'll hope the American people have forgotten, and they'll say, oh my gosh, do you all realize next year the tax cuts go away and the spending, the extra spending for our military goes away, will be unsafe. This will hit our economy so hard that it's going to be a fiscal cliff, and nobody wants to drive over this fiscal cliff. So what they'll do is they'll do all the fiscally irresponsible things they did in the first 3 years. They'll continue those forward. And I gave a speech on the floor of the House. I said, this is the Titanic. We're not rearranging the deck chairs on it with this bill. We're putting more coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.
Right. And here's the thing. If you look at 10 years from now, even 4 years from now, we will have added to the debt. And so the interest right now, the interest on the debt is past military spending.
Yes.
So the interest on the debt is exploding. We are going to add to the debt, and that number is just going to keep rising. So you're building a higher base from which it's harder to come back from.
The interest on the debt right now is about $16,000 per family. Think about that. You are being additionally obligated, your family is additionally obligated to another $16,000 every year that goes toward nothing but paying banks and foreign countries that have invested in our debt. And the other multiplier on this, Catherine, as you well know, they're not just increasing the principal on which we pay the interest is going up because more and more we are financing this debt through monetization. Of course, it goes through banks before we borrow it back from ourselves. So the banks get a little bit of money on the monetization, and it doesn't look as much like monetization. And these foreign sovereign funds that have typically, historically invested in our debt are saying, you know what? You guys are printing so much money and you promised to pay us back in US dollars. We don't think that 4% is a good rate because we're pretty much convinced you're diluting your own currency that you promised to pay us back in by more than 4% a year. So they're demanding 4.5% and 5% now. That's going up. And I believe we're going into a spiral here. What happens is the countries like China, I used to complain that China owned our debt or even that Japan owned our debt, and that wasn't such a good thing. But even China is saying, whoa, you're not a good investment anymore. And so we're going to the institutional banks that we loan money to from the Fed overnight.
Right. So tonight we have at Salier, we have a legislative briefing that's public on stablecoins, because one of Treasury's plans is they think by issuing stablecoins globally, they can use stablecoins to sell short-term Treasury bills. You know, they've got a huge amount of maturities coming up this year and next. And so they're hoping to raise $2 to $4 trillion over the next decade to finance, you know, by using stablecoins to get people to essentially invest in treasuries. And if you look at the projections on the big, beautiful bill, it just fills in the gap of of the increased deficit you're creating with the big, beautiful bill.
So they've ruined the stable dollar, and by taking us off gold and whatnot, and they've gone to something else that they claim is stable. It's kind of like taking the debt on one credit card and putting it on another credit card and hoping that that'll get you a little bit further.
So you know, I remember one politician once saying it's impossible to create a constituency that will support financial responsibility, but it appears to me that you're building one.
Well, listen, I think the constituency is young people. They're starting to see that housing is not affordable. Now, why is that? It's because housing represents real value, kind of like the land behind me or gold. And so the housing has been repriced in US dollars. So it's gone up and people are being paid their salary in US dollars. And also, you know, the interest rates going up, although they're not historically too high compared to, you know, a 30 or 40 year window, but all of those things are conspiring to keep housing out of the reach of young people, young couples, if only one of them is working. It used to be the case you could have a single wage earner and buy a house at a young age, and that would be a good investment. So I think the constituency is growing. As long as they connect the dots and understand that this is why everything is so expensive and out of reach, it's because of our deficit and overall debt.
So I have to tell you, one of the most important political fights I've ever seen, one of the most, for me, the most fascinating. I couldn't stop. I couldn't take my eyes off of your Twitter feed and everything that was going on. And to me, this is, if there's a fight for all the marbles that is important beyond measure, it's the bringing out the Epstein files. So tell us what happened before the accelerated recess was called and why you jumped in to try and bring transparency. Tell us about the bill that you sponsored, and tell us about the press conference on September 3rd.
So the Epstein files and that whole sex trafficking ring, that's exposing that is emblematic of what Trump promised, or the promise that he projected when he was elected, that there's always been this group of rich and powerful and politically connected people that have been outside of the reach of the judicial system. If they get in trouble, they just buy off a judge or buy off a witness and move on. And we were told or led to believe that that would be exposed, that Trump was going to be the bull in the china shop and expose these rich elites who've been beyond the law. And I've heard him recently say it's a hoax, but if it's a hoax, his attorney general fell for it, his FBI director fell for it, his vice president fell for it, and even his own sons fell for it if it's a hoax, because they all promised that this would be revealed. Even after the election, we were still being promised that this sex ring would be revealed and the things that the government knows about it would be shown to the American people. But that's not happening. And when it became apparent that this is a massive cover-up, I decided that I realized I could introduce legislation and force it to the floor for a vote. Politics is the art of the doable. And this wasn't doable a year ago. There weren't enough Democrats who would get on board. But now, I don't care how they get to the foot of the altar as long as they get there, foot of the cross. But some of these Democrats are seeing the light now that it's not their president who's in the White House. And some of them are very sincere, like my co-sponsor, Ro Khanna, who's having this press conference with me on September 3rd. But there's this parliamentary procedure in the House rules that's been there forever that says if you can get 218 signatures, people physically have to sign the document, you can bring any bill to the floor of the House of Representatives for a vote. You bypass the committee where it's died. You bypass the speaker, who may not want it because he's trying to protect people from taking a vote that would expose their preferences and maybe, if they vote the wrong way, which they might be inclined to do because they have donors who want them to vote the wrong way, then they would draw the ire of their constituents. But suffice it to say, I think I'm going to get 218 signatures because I think every Democrat will sign this. And I've already got 12 co-sponsors on the actual legislation to release all of the Epstein material. And I can get into why we won't run into the same problem that the president ran into when he said, pretty please, Mother May I, will the judge release the grand jury transcripts? That's not what we're doing. We are saying the DOJ has evidence that they submitted to the grand jury, and we are, by law, compelling them to release that evidence, all of the evidence. We're not going to the judicial branch of government. We're going to the executive branch and saying you have to release this with my legislation. So I've got a dozen Democrats a dozen Republicans who've co-sponsored the bill. If merely just 6 of them matriculate into signatures of the discharge petition, in other words, if 6 follow through, And I do believe we'll lose some of the people who were initially motivated to co-sponsor the bill. They may not sign the discharge petition, but I do also believe we'll pick up other Republicans after this press conference, which is going to happen on September 3rd. The press conference will just be Congressman Ro Khanna, who's a Democrat from California. He's kind of like me. He's an ideologue. He's not a partisan. You know, there's a difference between ideologues and partisans, even though they're both used as pejoratives, those two words. I like to say that ideologues believe in ideas, and they don't always follow their policy. So I can work with ideologues on the other side of the aisle, and Ro Khanna is one of them. He may not appreciate me calling him an ideologue. He may prefer to be called a populist. That's maybe a little more benign. But I think that's somewhat pejorative as well. In any case, working with Ro Khanna, we're going to have this press conference, and we're going to invite the victims, the survivors, if you will, of the Epstein sex trafficking ring, and we're going to let them speak. Now, we connected to them through their lawyer. Some people are saying, well, how do you know these just aren't people off the street who are chasing a dollar right now? It's because these are people who've already retained the services of this attorney, and so we're having them speak, and there will be victims and survivors who have never spoken publicly before. Now, people may say, oh, well, why are they speaking now? Well, they may have already provided evidence or testimony that's not public. Again, you get to the grand jury material that the judges are keeping secret. But if there were witnesses who testified, they're allowed to testify again. They can say this in public. And what we're doing is we're doing this at the Capitol, right in front of the steps of the Capitol. We are giving them their opportunity to speak on September 3rd. And I pray, I hope that the sacrifice that they are making by being public for the first time will not be in vain, and that my colleagues will follow Ro Khanna and I and sign the discharge petition and then vote yes to release the Epstein files.
So the discharge position, one of the reasons it's so powerful, which I think our listeners may not understand, is it forces every person in Congress to vote yes or no. And in coming into the 26 elections, how are they going to explain to their constituents that they voted no to transparency around the Epstein files?
You know,
how do you do that?
I'm only ever disappointed, Catherine, and my colleagues when I get my hopes up. And my hopes are really high right now. I hope I'm not disappointed, though. I think this could be a unanimous vote if it comes to the floor. Because once you get to only 30 holdouts, do you want to be one of the 30 who try to sweep this under the rug? I mean, you're virtually implicating yourself or your donors or some of your friends if you vote against this. I'm sure they'll have excuses or reasons for it, but I think it could be unanimous if we can force it to the floor. Now, there's one off-ramp that Speaker Johnson may choose to use. The House of Representatives can do anything it wants. It makes its own rules. The Constitution says that. And we make our rules at the beginning of every Congress. But you can change the rules midstream during Congress. And I know all of this because I served on the Rules Committee for 2 years. If Congress makes sausage and it's a sausage factory, the grinding machine is in the Rules Committee. I've seen it done. I've been turning the crank in there. So what they could do is change the rules mid-Congress. But here's the good news. That requires a vote, and Speaker Johnson would need to get 218 people to change the rules. Typically what they'll do is they'll encapsulate that rule change in a very popular thing. Let's say a pay raise for soldiers or oxygen for grandmothers, and put the rule change in there. But I think this issue has enough visibility and notoriety among the American public that they may not be able to get away with that. And even if they try to have that vote to change the rules, and even if they encapsulate it in something very popular, that vote on the rule change becomes the vote on whether you want the Epstein files released or not.
Right, right. So Chuck Schumer did something in the Senate where he said if 5 senators on the Homeland Security Committee agree that you can request that these files be made public. Do you know what that was?
I do not know what that is. We do have a sponsor for this legislation in the Senate as well. One subtlety that I need to explain also is Speaker Mike Johnson is in favor of passing a non-binding resolution that would not have the force of law. It would be a House resolution, not a joint resolution. It would be a House resolution, and it would go nowhere. Okay.
Right.
And there are possibly some subpoenas that will issue, but people can plead the fifth and not show up or whatever. What the legislation that Ro Khanna and I have offered is it's a law. And so after it passes the House, it would also have to pass the Senate. I do believe we're going to get more than 2/3 votes required to override a veto. But even if we got a simple majority, I don't think President Trump has the political capital to veto a bill, a piece of legislation that comes from Congress that says you need to release these files. And while I'm mentioning his name, I do want to say I don't believe that the president himself is implicated in these files. What I do believe, though, is he has some very powerful friends and donors who could be embarrassed. I mean, they may not even be guilty, but they might be embarrassed. There may be evidence of extramarital activity. Maybe they didn't have sex with underage women. Maybe it was consensual. Who knows? But their embarrassment is not a reason to keep these files from coming out. And one final interesting thing, there's a big donor to the National Republican Congressional Committee. He's also a big donor to Mike Johnson. And he happens to be one of the 3 billionaires that are financing what's so far a $2 million smear campaign against me in Kentucky. That donor is in Epstein's black book. So, and he's a billionaire. He's a hedge fund manager from West Palm Beach. He may be motivated to take me out of Congress or maybe to rough me up to try to change my mind so that I would back off on this, but I'm not going to back off in spite of these negative ads that they're currently running against me in Kentucky using a super PAC called MAGA Kentucky. It's neither MAGA nor Kentucky. They have exactly 3 donors. They're all 3 billionaires. One's from Las Vegas, Nevada, one's from New York City, and another's from West Palm Beach. And they're all mad actually about one thing. They're mad that I don't vote for foreign aid and I'm not voting to fund wars in the Middle East.
Right, and I should note, if I remember, AIPAC spent over $400,000 in the election before the last one to try and knock you out, and it got nothing done.
Yeah, but that was penny ante poker, I think. They're in for real now. They've spent $2 million 9 months before an election. Nobody does that. I mean, people are going back to school. They're buying blue jeans and sneakers for their kids. They are not watching these ads for the most part, but the ads are still running. I think they'll spend $20 million maybe to try and take me out. The interesting thing is they've been at it over 160 days, and in spite of the president asking for somebody to run against me, nobody has stepped up to do it. I'm sure they'll find some kind of patsy, but and probably a formidable candidate. But I feel good about my prospects of coming back.
Right, but I want to put the millions in perspective. In Kentucky's 4th district, there are approximately 40,000 people who vote in a congressional race in the 4th district, right?
Yeah.
So 40,000. Look at how much money that is per person. That's extraordinary.
It's already $50 a person. And if they spend $2 million if they spend $20 million, that'll be $500 a vote that they are going to spend to try to defeat me. That's kind of, and by the way, I don't think they'll defeat me, but let's say they got 51%. That's actually $1,000 a vote. If they can get 20,000 votes in a primary, if they can switch 20,000 votes in a primary to be against me with $20 million, that's insane. And I just think Kentuckians, hopefully, they won't fall for it. Most of the people I'm hearing have not fallen for it. It's 3 billionaires. And Catherine, you know this. You've had
I've had similar squabbles.
Yeah, you've spoken out in the past about the rich and powerful and politically well connected, and it's cost you financially. I know you could be a lot better off. So you know what's involved. But dogs, I remind people here in Kentucky, dogs do not bark at parked cars. The reason they are coming after me is I'm actually very effective at imposing transparency on 1/3 of the U.S. government. And that's all it takes. You know, yeah, I'm just one vote out of 435, but I was the guy that forced them all back on March 27th, 2020, forced every member of the House of Representatives to come back and vote on whether we're going to spend $2 trillion on a COVID bailout bill that caused inflation and shortages. And we're still seeing inflation from that. I'm the guy that right now on social media that is explaining to the general public that Mike Johnson and John Thune are holding pro forma sessions every 3 to 4 days in Congress to keep Congress from being in a technical recess to prevent President Trump from making recess appointments. He's got a couple hundred people he's picked out that could be in there. And, you know, elections are supposed to have results or ramifications. But if you don't put people in there, the bureaucracy goes on. It's the same, without Trump's people, it's the same bureaucracy that was run by Joe Biden's people. So the Republican Speaker of the House and the Republican Senate Majority Leader are conspiring every 4 days to hold a pro forma session that's less than 2 minutes long. They say the prayer and the pledge in the House. In the Senate, it's like 30 seconds long. And then they gavel out, and that's solely to keep Trump from making recess appointments. They hate me for breathing air because when I exhale, I tell people this.
Yeah, you're explaining the inside baseball. So I have 2 quick questions to ask you about Epstein. One is the report yesterday was that Maxwell, who had testified and given testimony to or had serious interviews with the Department of Justice and was moved to a sort of a more lenient facility, is now going to be allowed to do work release. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I don't know which of those tales is true, but I haven't verified them myself. I have no reason to disbelieve those reports. And I would just say that's just as suspicious as Epstein killing himself.
Right.
You know, if a turtle ends up on top of a fence post, it didn't get there by mistake.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Now, people say to me that Epstein is not important. This is a distraction. You know, I would note that the speaker accelerating the recess to avoid, dealing with your bill is an extraordinary event, in my opinion. But when Carolyn and I were preparing our list of all the different issues we wanted to talk with you about, we have a list of 10 issues, and that's pared down from 20. We have a list of all the bills you've sponsored. If you look at all these terrible things that people are trying to get done, and you ask the question, who's doing this? It leads back to the same network. It's the same network of billionaires causing problems. And if you look at the Epstein story, it is a crosscut to all these different issues. And if you can't get transparency on Epstein, then you're not going to make progress on any of these different issues.
Yeah, I thought Republicans were for social values and high moral standards. And if right now in Congress and in the White House, they're working to cover up a sex trafficking ring. And it's, I don't think it's just a coincidence that one of the 3 billionaires who's spending money to get me unelected is actually in Epstein's black book. And that's not an indication of guilt. It's just an indication that Epstein had his personal cell number, and may have called him from time to time. But it's no coincidence, really, because these are the same people. They're the same people who are for foreign wars overseas. They're the same people that get the money put back in their pockets when it goes through USAID. And if we can't tackle this issue on sex trafficking among the elites, then you'll never get any of the other things solved, because they can get one over on any member of Congress. They can get one over on any member of the public who speaks out and not have to go to court. They're operating outside of the law. We need to bring everybody inside of law, and then and only then can we address the bigger issues like the fiscal issues and central bank digital currency and the oligopoly in the meat industry. All of these things are connected.
Right. I don't see making progress on food freedom, health freedom, constitutional provisions, financial freedom, unless you can address this. It's, you know, it's basically, you're talking about a class war between a group of people who've created essentially sovereign immunity for themselves.
And I think we were going to talk about the Prime Act at some point in here,
Yep.
but that's a perfect example. The Prime Act and the PrEP Act, but the PrEP Act is one where you give immunity to pharmaceutical manufacturers and medical device manufacturers in contravention of state law. I think it's a violation of the 10th Amendment. I call it medical malpractice martial law, but we're living under that right now. And these are the same people, the investors and the CEOs and the hedge fund managers and the companies that own these private companies. They're all the same people, and they've been granted immunity by the government. And the government, there's a difference between big business and big government. Big government can legally put a gun to your head and put you in a cage. And so big business wants to employ big government as their police force to make you buy their products or just go away when they injure you.
Okay, so the Prime Act is something, you know, we've had you on the Soleil Report many times to talk about the Prime Act. We're very enthusiastic about the Prime Act because if we want healthy food, we need successful farmers and ranchers. And we see the Prime Act as absolutely critical to protecting a healthy, successful local food supply. So tell us about the Prime Act, how it came to be, what it is, and how we make it finally get passed.
Well, it was born out of frustration in 2015. That's the first time I introduced it. The late state senator Frank Nicely from Tennessee, who was an amazing patriot and fought for food freedom there in the state legislature, he and I conceived of the Prime Act on a hayride going through Joel Salatin's farm in Virginia. And we were bemoaning the fact that Congress had just removed country of origin labeling from beef and pork in 2015. I was one of the few Republicans who fought that. Again, those are the globalists at work trying to make sure that they can sell you a substandard product from Canada or Mexico or China and slap a label on it that says USDA and trick consumers into thinking that means USA. So Congress repealed country of origin labeling because they were told to do so by the World Trade Organization. Again, give me a break. Who are those judges? They're not in my copy of the Constitution. But I decided, you know what? The best way to get a good product is to buy local and to know the label isn't the best way. Actually, knowing your farmer is the best way. So, and because I farm this farm behind me, I raise beef cattle, grass-fed beef cattle there. Here, I was familiar with the issues that face farmers who are trying to get their meat processed, because the oligopolies, there's 4 meat packers control 85% of the market, and 2 of them are foreign owned. One's owned by Brazil and one's owned by China. And they're controlling 85% of the meat that's processed in the United States. Yeah, I see there's concentrated animal feeding facility on the screen. That's what they use, and they don't want grass-fed, and they're making it harder for you to get to market. If you're a farmer, they're making it harder for consumers to find that solution, and they do that by having what Joel Salatin calls scale prejudicial regulation. They have the same regulations for a slaughterhouse that employs 10 people as one that employs 1,000 people, and it's ridiculous. So the Prime Act would say that you could sell meat within your state as long as you don't cross state lines, as long as you're in intrastate commerce within the state. You can sell meat to a consumer from a farmer using a local processor, and the federal government doesn't need to be involved in that transaction. You don't need to comply with those regulations. You merely need to comply with your local health department and your state laws, which is how restaurants are run. We don't have federal inspectors inside of restaurants, and a lot of those are cutting up more meat every night than these small processors do, and the supermarkets as well.
Right. So I remember once going to Joel's farm and learning how to slaughter a chicken. And the big issue then was, can we, and this is what Senator Nicely did in Tennessee, make it possible for farmers to slaughter up to 20,000 chickens a year. And that's the difference between a profitable farmer and a farm that's going to lose money. In other words, it just takes a few things like the Prime Act to put a lot of farmers and ranchers back on a sustainable economic platform.
Yeah, and guess who's against my bill? National Cattlemen Beef Association. Why is that? Because they're the foxes watching the hen house. Those are the meat packers who are pretending to be farmers, looking out for farmers. Now, when you get down to county beef associations, they are in favor of the Prime Act because they're close to the farmers. They're listening to their membership. But when you get to the national organization in D.C., you have these people against my food freedom bills. In fact, it's the milk lobby who's against my raw milk bill that would make it legal to transport raw milk from a state where it's legal to another state where it's legal. Imagine that. My late wife texted me when she saw the milk lobby come after me in the media. She said, OMG, I didn't realize the lactose lobby was so intolerant.
Okay, well, Carolyn and I'm going to ask Carolyn to jump in. Carolyn and I just did a wonderful interview with the toxicologist who's been fighting the effort federally and in some of the states, North Carolina and Tennessee, to get liability protecting the pesticide makers. And it was one of the most frightening interviews we've ever done because she believes that if they get liability, we could be looking at an impact on fertility that could literally rise to an extinction level event, is what she said. Carolyn, do you want to?
You mean a shield from liability? Yes.
Shield from liability. Yeah, shield from liability.
Yes, and there isn't any legislation at the federal level at this point trying to stop that, but Georgia and North Dakota have both passed laws providing for liability shields, and basically what that does is it prevents people at the state level from suing for the injuries for being exposed, which is mostly through your skin, apparently, that people get Parkinson's disease and other things. And it's very clear because they're winning in courts in the places where they haven't stopped it yet. They're winning very large verdicts from juries against Bayer. So the lobby of Bayer and the company that owns the other paraquat pesticide want to have a shield from liability so that people cannot sue for their injuries. And what they've done is change something. What the proposed legislation does is it changes the timing when the label can be reviewed by the FDA. And there's a process that's every 15 years where they review the label. And basically, this keeps them from changing the label. And you need to have the label changed in order to successfully sue for false labeling. So the Congress people, the representatives who are representing the lobbyists, the Bayers of the world, are saying, well, this isn't a liability shield. It's just an FDA, it changed in the FDA rules. Well, ultimately, that's exactly what it is, because it would prevent people who are injured from getting verdicts in state court.
Well, that's extremely troubling. Let me say that tort does belong in state courts. Like federal law should not override state law in this regard. That's what they do with the PrEP Act. But here's the concern that I have after listening to you, Carolyn, is once they get this passed in a few of the bigger states, what they'll do is the corporations will say, oh, it's so hard to operate under this patchwork of laws.
Yeah.
We need a consistent framework. And so they'll come to Congress, and a lot of those bozos in the state legislature who've put a penny in the fuse box will come to Congress, and it'll be immediately familiar to them. They will have matriculated up. They will have graduated from their small swamps into the big swamp. And they'll be, oh, I've seen this bill before. We passed this in the Georgia State Legislature. And they'll be sponsoring it there and championing it, and they'll make it a federal thing. This is what they did with labeling of GMOs. I've been in Congress long enough to see this bill come through where Vermont had their own labeling and California had their own labeling, and the big food oligopolies said, oh, we can't make different labels for different states. You know how ridiculous that is?
Too expensive.
Yeah, too expensive. I'll give you a break, by the way. You can print, I can go to my house and print a label for, fractions of a penny. And so they said, well, it may get mixed up in the shipment and in the warehouses that distribute it, and then we'll get sued accidentally, and we didn't even mean to. It's just, it's a bookkeeping nightmare for us. And so they convinced Congress to pass a uniform law, which is much less, not as good as the ones in Vermont and California, and make it apply to the whole United States. So at least right now, the stage you're in with those pesticides seems to be where the battle is supposed to be, which is at state legislatures. But I know how this matriculates up. The ideas come with the state legislators I say the state legislature is like juvie. Somebody's in juvenile detention, and they learn how to carjack. Like maybe they're just in there for stealing a candy bar, but they go to juvie and they learn how to carjack from the other people in juvie, and then they end up in the big prison doing the big crimes.
Right. Now, our constituency at Children's Health Defense, I'm sure, is very interested in your repeal the PrEP Act legislation. And we have a term for the week every week, and the term I selected is the noun repeal. So a repeal is a law that rescinds, that turns around a previous law. And so your repeal the PrEP Act would eviscerate, I assume, would completely do away with the PrEP Act. The PrEP Act is, there are ways you could repeal by passing positive legislation that is contrary to specific provisions of the PrEP Act, but it would be better to completely do away with that, I assume.
Yeah, and every time I introduce a bill to repeal something, people say, we don't need another law, Massie. And I'm like, read my bill. It doesn't create another law. It repeals another law or weakens a law or gives some relief from a bad law, for instance, like the PRIME Act does. I would say there's another word that could be used in the context of the PrEP Act, and that is rescind. The PrEP Act sits there, and it can be deployed. It's like an aircraft carrier. Well, it got deployed by Trump's first, in the context of COVID, by Trump's first HHS secretary, or the one that was in place in 2020. The HHS secretary could rescind that emergency declaration that gave PrEP Act protection to all these, health institutions. But I'm afraid Trump would probably fire Bobby Kennedy if he did that against Trump's wishes. So it's really up to Trump, and that's unfortunate. And now we get back to the Epstein files, right? Because there's a reason he doesn't want the Epstein files released. He's got rich and powerful friends and donors who could be embarrassed. But let me tell you the way the PrEP Act has been abused in the context of COVID. It doesn't just protect the vaccine manufacturers. It would protect the people who make remdesivir. It would protect the people who make masks. Let's say in 20 years, we find out that everybody's lungs look like the lint collection thing on your dryer because you were breathing in these masks that, abrade and the pieces. We all know that. If you've ever changed your dryer lint, or taken it out of your dryer, you know what happens to fabric. Anyways, here's just some examples of the way the PrEP Act's been abused. In a nursing home, somebody slips and falls. Now, because there's water left on the floor. Normally, that nursing home resident could sue the place. But if they say, oh, we were taking them to get their vaccine, when they slipped in the puddle, oh, now you got PrEP Act immunity. There was a mother who went to get her kids a flu shot in Kentucky, and they accidentally gave them at one of these pharmacies, they accidentally gave her kids the adult dose of the COVID jab and said, oh, you can't sue us because that was a COVID jab. And the PrEP Act that covers anything done in the context of COVID protects us. And then there was a woman in Kentucky, when they swabbed her, you know how they used to do that in your nose. I don't know if anybody's still taking those swabs. Get your brain checked otherwise. But they punctured the membrane that keeps the brain fluid in place. And she literally had the brain fluid going down in her throat. And they said, you can't sue because of the PrEP Act. I mean, it required surgery to fix this. Oh my gosh, there it is. Now I'm going to have nightmares. But that's the kind of thing that the PrEP Act does. It's horrible. It needs to be repealed. But it could, and that's what I want to do, a full repeal of it. But the emergency declaration that invoked it in the context of COVID pandemic could be rescinded right now too.
Well, is there anything Congress could do to affect that?
There are expedited procedures in these emergency acts in Congress for countermanding emergency declarations. For instance, they wouldn't need 60 votes in the Senate, and they wouldn't need the Speaker's agreement to come to the floor. But here's what they did to us on tariffs. So the reason the president can do tariffs right now is he's declared emergencies, and Congress gave him special power in the 60s and 70s. I would argue they delegated beyond their authority to delegate the power to tax, but they gave it to the president if there was an emergency. So President Trump has declared emergencies. Those all underpin his tariffs. He's operating inside of a legal framework. But in Congress, we're supposed to be able to vote on that. But what they did in the Rules Committee is they said, for the purposes of the Emergency Declaration Act, a day is not a day in Congress. And so now 15 days never elapse, and the legislation to bring a countermand to an emergency declaration to the floor of the House never ripens. And so we never get a vote on whether there's a real emergency or not. And what they did is they slipped that in some otherwise favorable bill, and most of my colleagues didn't even know they were turning off their own power to countermand executive declared emergencies by voting for that.
Well, that's how the PrEP Act got enacted in the very beginning. It was in the middle of the night after the conference committee had already signed off on NDAA legislation that somebody slipped that on in and then got signatures the next day. So yeah,
By the way, I've been in Congress over 12 years, and I saw something happen this year I have never seen in my life. Like a full week or two after the big ugly bill passed, they changed the language of it using a rules resolution. I've never seen them change the language.
Was there any notification to the members after they did it?
They said these are technical corrections, and they used a joint resolution to change the language. uh, technical corrections or something, but there were at least 24 changes, and they were not technical corrections. They were things that lobbyists were still smarting about, and the big bill got passed so quickly that the lobbyists couldn't get everything they wanted changed in time. So the Speaker of the House let them change the language afterwards, and my colleagues just kind of fell for it. They're like, oh, they're just changing the punctuation or something. Sure, I'll vote for this little resolution to tune up the bill.
Why should I read it?
Yes.
That is truly frightening. So I have two more questions for you before we go. So foreign wars. So you've been very, you just sent out another message on X about we should not participate in more war with Iran.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to believe that progress on Epstein will help us make progress on stopping and slowing down foreign wars. Is that a fair assessment?
I think you're getting real close to the mark here. I mean, I do believe that Epstein worked for Mossad and maybe even our own intelligence agencies. Why not get 2 paychecks instead of 1? I mean, Maxwell's sisters work in intelligence and in the defense industrial complex now. So and Maxwell's father was in intelligence. Yeah, I think that's all linked. And by the way, if you're watching this show and you disagree with me, if you think we should bomb Iran again or otherwise get involved in a conflict between 2 sovereign countries where we have no beef, if you do believe that, please at least acknowledge the Constitution requires Congress to vote on that before we do it. And we did that in the first Iraq War. We did it in the second Iraq War. We did it before going to war in Afghanistan, although the authorization was overly broad and has been used for everything under the sun since then. Congress got together and debated. I remember listening to the debates. I was in a woodworking shop working on something, listening to these debates in Congress that they were having about whether to go to war in Iraq or whether to strike Iraq and Afghanistan. We should have those debates. People say, oh, you take away the element of surprise. The element of surprise, what the hell? They were on a signal chat, all of the president's people were on a signal chat broadcasting it. And the president himself was on Twitter saying, I'm going to bomb you. So how could it take away the element of surprise to debate it? We don't have to direct the president. In fact, it's not our prerogative once we declare that there should be war. It's not our prerogative to declare how to wage the war. You would not want a Congress meeting every week to do that. So the element of surprise could be in which targets are hit, where the attack is launched from, which munitions are used, when the attack happens. All of that stuff could still be just as secret as it was in this case, but it would be constitutional. So and I do have genuine, honest people acting in good faith who say, you know what, Massie, I think we should bomb the crap out of Iran, but I agree with you. It should have been a vote of Congress.
Right. There should have been a vote of Congress. Okay, so let's turn to young people. So you have had a remarkable career so far in public service, starting with essentially being the county mayor. Tell us, if a young person is interested in public service, do you encourage them to get involved, and how do they get involved? If you were Thomas Massie 25 years ago and you're interested in public service, how do you jump in?
Well, you tend to ride the horse that brought you. So let me explain my personal bias in this. First of all, do not major in political science. That it is not a science. And if I can't talk you out of majoring in political science, at least do a double major and major in theater and call your degree a political theater degree. Now, that would qualify you to serve on the House Oversight Committee and the House Judiciary Committee, where we are master thespians and express righteous indignation whether we feel it or not. And I'm being self-deprecating here and trying to paint myself as I paint everybody else. Some of us are genuine, but don't major in political science. That's the point. Get a real degree where you can make a living. It's because once you get into politics, you don't want to have to rely on your donors. Now, I'm not saying, because the honest people who get into politics have less money when they get out than when they get in. But you see some who don't, and they're not. They're probably doing things that maybe they're not illegal, but they may be immoral. And you don't want to put yourself in that situation. So you don't have to be rich to run for office, but I do think that you should be at least self-sufficient enough financially that you could endure a 12-month campaign without a salary, because a lot of times you're going to have to quit your job to do that full time. So my advice to young people is get a life. Go do something that qualifies you to relate to the thing that everybody else has to face in this world, like have kids, purchase a house, get married, have a job,
or build a house. You built your house.
Well, you don't have to build your house, but it could be helpful also. There's some analogies there, but
yeah.
But that's my point, Catherine, is I think the best politicians are ones who didn't go to school to be a politician. They went to school to be something else, like our founding fathers. They were doctors. Lawyers are even okay. That's a legitimate degree. Just do like an English major or something as your undergrad. Don't do political science if you're going to be an attorney. But our founding fathers, they were attorneys, they were farmers, they were inventors, entrepreneurs. You know, they had a life, and it wasn't their life's aspiration to be in politics. And also I would advise to make sure you have a spouse that's along for it too, because that's a person who's nobody else is as interested in your well-being as your spouse is, and they are the most conflicted to give you the best advice and keep your soul. So that's a bit of advice I have.
Okay. Okay, well, I want to come back to the press conference. That's going to be on September 3rd. Is it going to be live stream? How do we watch it? How do we participate?
Yeah, it'll be at the House Triangle, which is this little triangle where the backdrop is the Capitol. We'll be right in front of the House. There will be, I'm hopeful there will be dozens of TV cameras. But even if there's not, even if the revolution is not televised, we are going to put it on
yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, bring yours.
Yeah, we will live stream it ourselves. I'll try to pick one of the more competent news agencies if they're going to cover it, and then promote that on my social media.
Okay.
But I believe it's in the morning. I think it's 10 a.m. but September 3rd. Go ahead and put it on your calendar. Do not miss it. And then do one thing for me after you watch it. Make 3 phone calls. I'm only asking for 3 phone calls. And your phone plan probably covers a certain amount of long distance. Call only the 3 people in Washington, D.C. that you can vote for. And that is your 2 U.S. senators and, most importantly, your 1 U.S. representative. And tell them to sign the Massie discharge petition. You don't have to remember the HRES number or whatever. They're going to know what you're talking about when you call their office. Call their D.C. office and tell them you would, on September 3rd, September 4th, September 5th, that's when the heat needs to be turned up, and they need to be getting, the good news is, if each congressman gets 20 phone calls a day from people who can actually vote for them, that can move the needle.
Absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, Carol and I are going to do that right after Labor Day. We need you to do the same. Congressman Massie, we can't thank you enough for joining us on Financial Rebellion. And you just keep us posted on what we can do to support. I will tell everybody listening to this, stay tuned to Congressman Massie's X feed, because you will, not only will you stay current, but you will laugh a lot.
I have today I tweeted or posted some peach content, and I put a warning that there was peach content on my Twitter feed. But I'll have updates from the farm, I'll have updates from my district, I'll have updates on legislation, and I will tell you things that nobody else is going to tell you. Like right now, I'm rebroadcasting these pro forma sessions that the Speaker of the House and Majority Leader are having. that where they gavel in and gavel out solely to keep Trump from making recess appointments.
Yep.
I will get you news that nobody else except for
That is
Carolyn
a
and
fact.
Catherine are reporting.
That is a fact. And we will see you in Ohio at the end of September at Rogue Food. We're looking forward to it. And I think there's still slots open. So if you want to meet Congressman Massie in person, you can do it at Rogue Food. Joe Saladin will be there too. All the gang will be there. So again, Congressman Massie, God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of the summer.
I'll see you at Rogue Food.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
ladies and gentlemen, CHD event coming up in November 9th. Maybe if you could just flash the information, Lou, on how we can all find out about that as well, too. Okay, Carolyn, Congressman Massie, thank you, everyone. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back to work on the farm today.
Eat those peaches.
Yeah, well, I got a fixed fence so I can move my cattle to greener pastures.
My name is Lauren. I am a board certified, dually licensed funeral service professional in the state of Mississippi.
Okay, and so I was just asking you some questions before of us to figure out what we're going to talk about today. And
Sure.
you had mentioned seeing different things going on during COVID than what your profession looked like prior to
Correct.
COVID. So can you talk about some of those things?
Sure. Prior to COVID, the death ranges, we rarely saw infants passing away. Now there's an excessive amount of that happening. And just the death range from infants to elderly, the increase of young people, the increase of elderly people, it's just mind-blowing, the wave of death that the funeral service industry has experienced. And certainly it's all across the state. There have been lots of need for additional, of course, professionals in this industry which just aren't there. So, of course, we feel the burden of that.
Absolutely. And as an embalmer, you said that some of your processes have actually had to change.
Correct.
I'm just curious, and you don't have to answer this if you're not able to, but are you able to see if someone has had the vaccine or not when they come in?
There are some cases that information is given. However, there are cases that it's not given, that information is not given.
Okay. And so you did say you were seeing some irregular clotting and different vascular type issues.
Of course. The past couple of years, there's been lots of irregularities. Prior to 2021, the vascular system pretty much was intact on mostly everybody, that I could go in and preserve the body traditionally via just one point. There are some cases, of course, that were unique. However, as time has gone on, the vascular system has become increasingly difficult to work with. It's occluded. There is, no way to preserve the body traditionally as we once did. We're having to go all over the body to preserve, the foot, the hand. Also, we have a method that we actually use externally when we are unable to use the vascular system for adequate preservation. The whole practice has changed in that area.
And of course, this is anecdotal, but why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is? There's something that's going into people's bodies that is creating something that doesn't belong there. And ultimately, if it doesn't belong there, then the body doesn't know what to do with it. Prior to whatever's happening here. There are chemicals that we could use to put inside the body that traditionally would break down any blockages that are living in these vessels. Now those chemicals don't work. I'm seeing things that stay intact. They don't dissipate like normal. They keep their integrity, and they pull, and it's not normal. Yeah.
I don't know if you're able to comment on this as well, but have you seen an increase in younger people's deaths when it comes to different heart issues, myocarditis, or things like that?
Yes. And also, of course, I know people that have developed, those illnesses, so that are young and should not be experiencing that. Strokes, heart attacks, myocarditis.
Is there anything else you want to tell people about what you're seeing?
I would just like to say that something has changed, and it's affecting a lot of people, and that we just need to think before we just put whatever in our bodies. Our immune system is God created us to have an immune system to fight off illnesses, and I think we just need to think critically before we just insert anything into our body.
Absolutely. And if we do, and of course we're not giving out medical advice, but if we do and we're seeing irregularities, we have to ask, why is this happening?
Yes, why is this happening? And why is this happening? And I need to tell people, and that's why I'm here today, because people need to know that what I'm seeing, because not everybody sees that, is definitely different. The blood is being affected by whatever this is that's going on, and it's killing people. And I just strongly recommend people to think critically before you just put anything into your body.
Thank you for coming today to tell your story.
Thanks.
The truth is, vaccine injuries are real and they've been ignored.
These childhood vaccinations, the people of America are telling us they are not safe and effective. We are seriously concerned at Children's Health Defense about the disinformation and misinformation out there.
Society does not want to acknowledge vaccine injury, period. My son's life has been ruined physically and emotionally, and he is persecuted for the mere fact that he exists.
After 8 years of litigation, HHS conceded by preponderance of the evidence that Chris died from her HPV vaccinations.
Parents deserve the truth. We deserve real, informed consent, because no parent should have to live the nightmare I do.
I am heartbroken to hear these stories, and it makes me want to do something.
How about we ban pharmaceutical ads on TV?
I've advocated it, and you have a co-sponsor.
The government has decided that this particular industry doesn't have to be liable to anybody.
I am extremely suspicious, as a lawyer, of immunity that is granted in any blanket way across the board to any manufacturer or to anyone.
So if we're gonna do something, the North Star has gotta be medical freedom. I get to decide what's good for me and my family with proper information. And if I'm given improper information, just like in any other industry, there's gotta be accountability.
No more Pfizer-sponsored science. We need independent science.
I am competing against a pharmaceutical lobby of 1,600 lobbyists. That's 3 lobbyists for each member of Congress. This is insane.
Everybody sitting here, bar 2, vaccinated their families with catastrophic results. Over 12,000 signatures on those 2 buses of death, death, death. When will enough be enough? How many more buses? So this has to stop. And we implore you, please, to follow us at Children's Health Defence, at least break down the truth and get to the truth behind the science of what is really happening.